I'm calling this lecture Encoding Decoding because a lot of the ideas are taken from an essay of the same title by sociologist and culture critic Stuart. I'm also pulling ideas from French literary critic Roland Barthes. So we're going to start with some basic ideas about communication theory, and then we're going to take those ideas and relate them to images and eventually art. Here's the first thing I want you to understand. In the West, we have this model of sender-message-receiver. It's based in a fundamental belief that there's a point of origin, a creator God, who makes stuff, and then we, humans who are also created, receive the messages that come from God. So there's a hierarchy, author God, who makes meaning, which we then receive that meaning, as the audience to whom the author God is communicating. Basically, what that means is, when we think about reading a novel or looking at a painting, we, at least in part, look to the author or the artist for some of that work's meaning. Or think about it this way. When you listen to a Taylor Swift song, the song doesn't really exist apart from T. Swizzle. She's the origin, and we look to her and her love life as the source from which to enjoy the song. Of course, this metaphor breaks down because she also takes part in the performance of the song, so she's actually part of the work itself. But let's say Tay covers Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, which became famous in the 1960s when performed by the Shirelles, and was originally written by Carole King, who nobody seems to know anymore, but that's besides the point. So Taylor Swift's belting out Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow. But it's not her original song. She didn't write it. She's just performing it. And the way she performs is uniquely hers. The way Shirelles perform it is different. It's their way of performing. And the way Carole King performs it, because after all, she's the one who wrote the song in the first place, is the real way the song should be performed. The song has slightly different meanings on the basis of the different performances. Is Carole King's version more correct because it is in direct connection to the point of origin? What I'm trying to get at is that we live in a world where the origin has become less significant than it was once deemed to be. After all, there's just more stuff out there, and humans are only so creative. The more images and songs and books and movies that are continually produced and circulated in society, the more we take these images and songs and books and movies and splice them up and Frankenstein them together to create other cultural products. The old products become the material bits of new amalgams, or we take the pre-existing products and we remake them with a twist. For example, you have movie productions of books. Sure, that's just translating story content from one medium to another, but that means characteristics of the original are lost and replaced with the new characteristics of the new medium. Like, it's really hard to fit a few hundred pages of text into an hour-and-a-half movie. But as more and more remakes come into being, you get different interpretations that can be really divorced from the original source. After who knows how many films and miniseries versions of Great Expectations were made, including an animated feature-length film, eventually you get an American contemporary sexed-up version that would probably have Charles Dickens rolling in his grave. So ultimately, the original source, Charles Dickens himself, becomes a faded thought on the back burner of a Hollywood franchise. Here's another way to think about things. Mediation. Remember that original model, sender-message-receiver? Well, it implies that an author created a message that is then directly received by the audience. There's no interpretation or skewed meaning in the delivery of the message, because mediation is not taken into account. So let's look at this word, I. Now, when we say I, what do you think of? You think of you. You think of your own identity and experiences. Your version of I is mediated by your life, your age, your nationality, culture, gender, familial circumstances, education, economic background, etc. No two people are the same I. The concept of I, in and of itself, is a moving target that is contingent upon, mediated by, you. What this means is, the way you, the I, are interpreting what I'm saying is different than the way another listener interprets what I'm saying, because all of what you receive is mediated by a variety of things. Sure, there's you, your life experiences, etc., but there's also the context in which you're listening. If you're riding on a bus and distracted by the passengers around you, those factors that mediate your reception are going to factor into the way you understand this lecture. There's a different sort of experience if you're alone in your room, yet they all subtly play into the way you receive and interpret what I'm saying. There's no pure delivery of the message. A lot of different factors play into the meaning you receive. Another example of mediation. Remember Disney's Aladdin? You know, A Whole New World, a whole fantastic point of view? The very opening of the movie starts with this dude right here, the narrator. He's not Aladdin, or any character in the story itself. He's just the dude who's telling the story, and it's not even his story. He's mediating it, narrating it, telling a story that pre-exists and using his own words to do so. He's not the point of origin. He's just simply passing the story along. And that's Roland Barthes' point, that the author, the point of origin, has been replaced by the mediator, the narrator, because there's so much stuff in the world, so many stories and images and movies and songs. The act of creation is replaced by the act of piecing stuff together to create a new thing from old things, or just to recreate an original thing in a slightly altered way. First, you need a whole bunch of cultural production. Okay, done. Then, instead of creating something to add to the mix, because, well, a lot of stuff already exists, we select from what already exists, reconfigure it, and bam, produce a new mix that enters into the realm of cultural discourse and has a new meaning that is completely different as a conglomeration of images than the meaning that any other singular original image had prior to the manipulation. Okay, quick review. Based on the ideas of Roland Barthes and Stuart Hall, the author God is replaced by the mediator, the narrator, the person who's telling the story that pre-existed. They are not the point of origin, but simply a medium through whom the story is filtered. And, given our current situation, a world full of cultural production, the mediator takes the things that exist, reconfigures them, and creates a new thing from these cultural materials. I mean, consider memes or Broadway retakes on American history. These aren't original in and of themselves, but a reconfiguration of things to communicate a meaning that wasn't originally attached to the materials that are being reconfigured. And to do this, you need cultural knowledge to be able to navigate those meanings. So where am I going with all of this? We haven't even touched on art. But my concern is that you learn the fundamentals of image reading or image decoding. Because if you have this foundation, then we can move on to art as image. And of course, you already know all about images. We live and operate in a world of images. Instagram, billboards, incessant selfies, promo images for bands, video games, t-shirt logos, pop-up ads, book covers, even TikTok and Netflix as a realm of moving images. These are all part of our everyday lives. We are constantly navigating them. But do we realize they are encoded with certain meanings that we then decode to receive those meanings? Now, let's look at this image and decode it. First, it's an ad. We know this because we are enculturated to know it. The image takes the form of an ad, with a well-known brand name across the top. Without reading the fine print, we know it's an ad for hair dye just by seeing the word blonde, and of course, the ridiculously luscious waves of blonde hair that cascades across the majority of the image. Also, this isn't just any hot woman, it's Scarlett Johansson. She looks up and off to the distance, reclining with her arm bent behind her as she runs her fingers through her soft strands of hair. Because, beautiful, rich women have all the time in the world. They don't have to work. They can daydream and just look good. And the color scheme, super simple. White, gold, and a little bit of black. Black is elegant and slimming. White and gold reference heaven, otherworldliness, wealth, and luxury. The long, blonde days of summer. Summer is a time of leisure. There's no need to work. Also, who is the target audience? Women or those who identify as women. What do you get when you buy L'Oreal's Superior Preference Hair Dye number NB10? You don't just get blonde hair. You get what Scarlett's got. Luxury, beauty, and sophistication. L'Oreal isn't just selling hair dye. They're selling an identity through celebrity marketing. They leverage Scarlett Johansson, or rather Scarlett Johansson's image, and all of the associations with her image to get the target audience to want the product. Because ultimately, the target audience wants to be like Scarlett. Or this image, Year of the Yao. First things first, what is the focal point? Yeah, Yao Ming. Chinese national who played for the Houston Rockets, 8-time starter for the NBA All-Star Western Conference, and NBA Hall of Famer. Good, Yao, check. What else do you see in this image? He's holding a basketball. But the basketball represents the world. You have China on one side in red, the color associated with the Chinese flag and the Communist Party. Then US on the other side of the globe. The ball is in blue on the US side with associations of true blue and liberty or freedom. So Yao is holding the world in his hands. He's unifying two very different countries, ideologies, and cultures through his mad basketball skills. And to emphasize his singular power, look at all the people in the background. Oh wait, you can't. They're all blurred into one giant faceless mass. Yet Yao unites them. And here's something not immediately obvious. Who is he looking at? He's looking at you. Yao is looking at you. And in all his 7-foot glory, he's not looking down at you. He's looking at you as an equal. It's you and him. All these people in the background are just the supporting characters to the way you and Yao share this moment. He's uniting the whole world, and you are that special person that gets to share in his glory. Okay, let's take this further. And these are ideas that I'm taking from Stuart Hall. So we've got Yao, who plays for the Houston Rockets, and there's the reality of the Rockets, whether Yao Ming is playing for them or not. So the Rockets play ball. They got fans. It's basketball. But basketball is a billion-dollar business. You've got merch, and people buy merch, and they put their kid in it and take pictures, and suddenly the Rockets go from being a sports team to being a memorable part of your family's documented history. Or you can get a cake, and then the Rockets become even more enmeshed in your life because your birthday and your birthday memories and the photos of the birthday and all the people that came and ate the rocket cake, all of that may originate with the reality of the sports team, but it totally morphs into something else. Why? Because remember the model, sender, message, receiver? It goes from a simple linear hierarchy to a mangled field of senders, messages, receivers, resenders, message medleys and reconfigurations, and receivers send stuff out so that they're simultaneously senders whose messages are received and reconfigured by other receivers who send stuff out and who send stuff out and who send stuff out. And the origin diminishes in importance or totally disappears, and senders and receivers become one and the same. And they take things that already exist from different points of origin and combine bits of those things and send them out into other receivers who do the same thing and send that out. And pretty soon the model goes from a straightforward hierarchy, or this lecture model where I talk and you receive meaning, to an entangled web where I talk, you receive meaning, spew it back to you in your own words, which changes the meaning, to a discussion where your roommate starts talking about it to other people, which changes the meaning even more. So it goes from a lecture model to a discourse model where meaning is dynamically being shared all the time. American TV shows offer a great way to think about this discourse of meaning. So if we start with the 1950s, we've got Leave It to Beaver. Stereotypical middle-class American family. The dad works to provide for the family. The mom is the homemaker who has a 3-course breakfast ready for her family every morning. 2 strapping sons who respect their parents, and the parents slept in separate beds because nobody wants hanky-panky on national television. This show reflects everything America values, or did value. And yes, they do have a white picket fence in the front yard. By the 70s, you've got the Brady Bunch. This is a mixed family. Mr. Brady is a widower, and while it's never put into words, it's implied that Mrs. Brady is divorced. Mr. Brady has 3 sons, Mrs. Brady has 3 daughters, and they all have hair of gold, like their mother, the youngest one in curls. So now you have a sporty mom who chooses to stay at home, although she doubles as a freelance writer, sculptor, singer, and PTA president who manages to herd 6 kids and get dinner ready on time. Because that's the way women should be. America is changing. Women are kind of liberated, meaning they do everything and fulfill traditional expectations. Oh, and Mr. and Mrs. Brady are the first TV couple to sleep in the same bed, because by this point, America can handle it. Also in the 70s, we get the first reality TV show, which is in the form of a PBS documentary. The Louds are what America wants in a family. Upper middle class, 5 kids, attractive, dad is a successful business owner. But as you watch the show, traditional American values unravel before your eyes. For the first time, U.S. audiences see marital tensions on screen, which eventually leads to divorce. The oldest son is openly gay, and there's a rumor that one of the daughters got pregnant during filming. So we see America's changing culture seeping into mass media, which, for so long, was fixated on presenting ideals and conventions. Also in the 70s, civil rights start to impact TV sitcoms, because somebody at NBC eventually realizes black people should maybe be on a show. So we get Sanford and Son, which centers upon black protagonists in black culture. The show is about a man who is a junk dealer and his son, and this show becomes insanely popular. For the first time, American pop culture presents a story that is not white-centric, but instead focuses upon the personalities and emotions and everyday lives of African Americans. However, the status quo still remains. Sanford is a junk man because America is not ready for a wealthy black man yet. That kind of success is reserved for white America, apparently. But in the 80s, you get The Cosby Show. And whatever horrible but true things you might have heard about Bill Cosby, the show itself presents a turning point in black representation. I remember the anniversary of The Cosby Show's first episode. So many people were lauding it as a historic production because mainstream media was finally presenting a black family in a positive light. Both parents are role models who support and love their children. Mr. Huxtable was a doctor. Mrs. Huxtable was a lawyer. She slept in silk pajamas. They were equal in power. They lived in this ritzy brownstone in Brooklyn and had gorgeous, intelligent, and funny children. The Cosbys reflected a progressive America where a nuclear black family could happily thrive and contribute to a better society. I mean, there was the Jeffersons before that, but we've got to keep moving. In the 1980s, you get a lot of other shows that were responding to the changing cultural landscape. For example, you got My Two Dads. Nope, not gay, just a girl living with her 2 dads because she isn't sure which one is her biological father. Not a show that would have aired in the 1960s, y'all. And then there's Full House. Again, a reflection of the increasing number of mixed families in American society. You've got a dad, his kids, his brother-in-law, Uncle Jesse, and a random childhood friend who's a comedian, along with the eventually coupling up of Uncle Jesse and Dad's talk show co-host, which then leads to more kids and nobody moves out because the rent is too high. Finally, the family sitcom turns into Friends. The generation who watched the Brady Bunch as kids grew up and moved to New York, and they wanted to see a sitcom that reflected the new American norm, meaning Friends had to accommodate a social shift. People get married later, have kids later. Familial structure is replaced with, well, friends. Brief recap. Stuart Hall talks about cultural production as part of a dialogue. So the point of this sitcom crash course is to point out the way that TV is influenced by and reflected in societal shifts, which are influenced by and reflected in TV programs, which becomes this dynamic flux between mass media and changing social expectations. But before you get too excited about retro over-the-air television, we've got to turn back to academics. So next up is connotation and denotation. I mean, to engage in this whole encoding decoding transaction, we have to have a common knowledge of what images or text or songs even mean and reference. There should be a shared cultural foundation that allows for meaning exchange. So what happens when the cultural foundation becomes a little skewed? Well, you end up getting things like Japanese Christmas cards with a crucified Santa, or Ghanaian coffins in the shape of Coca-Cola bottles. The message is exchanged, but on the way, the commercialized Western origin of meaning is received by a different culture with different ways of interpreting that meaning. And then the meaning is quote-unquote sent by the receiving culture through a new thing that enters into the meaning exchange metaverse, and the resulting production can be rather unexpected. The American equivalent might be the 1950s cowboy costume. No clue where this comes from because no authentic cowboy would dress like this. Is this a Hollywood bastardization of mariachi meets flapper? Anyhow, that's where connotations and denotations come into play. So we're going to delve into these ideas that Stuart Hall presents. Okay, you have a sweater. The denotation is the literal thing. Sweater. Bam, done. But then you have the connotations. Roaming the woods on a chilly day, the sweater keeps you warm. This particular sweater may belong to an older male professor who smokes a pipe and reads a book by the fire, or a teeny bopper thrift store junkie who pairs it with a plaid skirt and combat boots. Whatever associations you have with the sweater are connotations. Sweater, cozy, warm, hot chocolate, all connotations. Now let's look at cow. Denotation, the literal thing, the animal, cow. Let's talk about the connotations of cow. In Western cultures, cows are associated with meat or farms, milk, cowboys, or even chicken. But that's how dominant cultural codes work, as we, in a Western context, look at a cow and think of Western connotations of that cow. But not so in other cultures. In southern India, for example, cow is not food. Cows are sacred. You don't kill cows. You let them be sacred and roam the streets, in which case Indian connotations of cow could be dung heaps or car accidents, because an overpopulation of sacred cows can really wreak havoc on daily life. Now let's look at this image comparison. The connotation-denotation metaphor breaks down a little with this example, but I want to drive the point into your head. Let's say the denotation is two women in underwear with their hands on their hips, hair blowing in the breeze and mouths open. Now, my friends, let's talk about connotations as all the things that make these images different. The woman on the right squares up with the camera to face us. Her body itself is full. I mean, she's voluptuous, yes, but she's also taking up a lot of pictorial space with her frontal position. Her facial expression and her hair are just as full. Not necessarily confrontational, but confident. And the underwear she dons, super simple, good coverage, no frills, comfortable and white. Woman to the left is another story. Her body is angled to show off some serious curves and to imply that the background space on her right side of the picture plane is, well, welcoming, as if to say, why don't you come on in the back room? I've got something to show you. Which, of course, is also echoed by the come hither look on her face. Oh, and hello. Look at that intimate apparel. You think that's comfortable? Good gracious, if she leans over, God knows what'll fall out. Also, who needs undies with flaps of lace attached? So, point I'm making is, if we think of denotations as the essentials, these images are more or less the same. But if we equate connotations with the details of these images, body poses, lingerie, etc., we read these images quite differently. So how does all of this relate to art? One of the things I'm hoping you've noticed is that we've looked at a lot of images. Art, while it's more than a mere image, circulates as imagery. And, as I said before, we live in a world inundated with images. We read images all of the time, whether it's artwork, t-shirts, billboards, graphic novels. We are an image-centric society. At the very least, we should know how to navigate those images as a sort of language, a way to communicate. So, you have the sender, the message, and the receiver. No, just kidding. This is the model, remember? Multidimensional senders who function as receivers, recycling and reconfiguring messages until you get this jumbled conversation. I want you to think of art that way. What are the cultural codes embedded in an artwork? How do we read those cultural codes? In what way does shared knowledge help us to understand what kind of meaning the artist is trying to get across? Also, there's power in images. When you're looking at an ad, the advertiser wants you to buy something. They want to, essentially, manipulate you into action. If you're aware of the strategies and codes, you can navigate the visual power play. Most art doesn't quite work that way, but there is an engagement factor. What is the image saying, and what do you do with that message? You may not think there's much to gain from looking, but if the whole culture in which you live is deeply ingrained with a visual tradition that relates to how we think about everything, from life's purpose to national identity to gender relationships to the way we occupy space, well, it might be good to understand how to function within this tradition, not just as a receiver, but as an active participant. So I want to end with this. If art, or just image making, is directly tied to the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, so think of TV shows and societal shifts, how are we supposed to understand the art that is made now? We have the common knowledge and cultural codes at hand, so how do we know how to use this knowledge to better understand contemporary visual production and the society in which we live?